The monastery on the mountain. At first glance, Monte Cassino was just a monastery on a hill. Yet for 4 months in 1944, it became the gate to Rome and a graveyard for thousands. Allied soldiers asked the same question again and again. Why are we still attacking that mountain? Commanders insisted, break through Cassino, and the road to Rome opens. But then something even stranger happened. The Allies bombed the ancient Abbey to rubble, and the German defense only grew stronger. At the center of this riddle stood one man, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. Hitler's smiling Albert, the master of defensive warfare in Italy. He decided to turn central Italy into one long killing ground. He chose Cassino as the anchor. And he held it through 4 battles, at the cost of around 75,000 casualties on both sides. Why did Kesselring defend Monte Cassino so stubbornly? Why did the Allies keep hammering at the same point? And how did this one monastery consume 250,000 men in a campaign that many in London and Washington already saw as secondary? This is the story of strategy versus terrain, politics versus lives. And a decision that shaped the entire Italian campaign. The road to Cassino, Italy becomes a trap. In September 1943, Italy surrendered. For many Allied leaders, that should have been the beginning of the end on the Italian peninsula. Instead, it was the beginning of something else, a slow, grinding mountain war. After the landings at Salerno and the capture of Naples, the Allied plan looked simple on paper. Drive north, break through the German lines, take Rome, and tie down as many German divisions as possible away from France and the Eastern Front. But Kesselring had other plans. He commanded German forces in Italy and saw the terrain as his greatest ally. Italy was a natural fortress, mountain ridges, narrow valleys, river lines, and very few good roads running north-south. So in late 1943, he ordered the construction of a series of defensive belts. The most important of these was the Gustav line, stretching from the Tyrrhenian Sea in the west, across the Apennines, to the Adriatic in the east. And right in the center of the Gustav line stood Monte Cassino, a 500-meter-high mountain dominating the Liri Valley. The Liri Valley, in turn, held Highway 6, the main road from Naples to Rome. On top of the mountain, the ancient Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino, nearly 1,400 years old. If the Allies wanted Rome, they needed Highway 6. If they wanted Highway 6, they had to pass Monte Cassino. Or so nearly everyone believed at the time. By late 1943, Allied forces under General Mark Clark's U.S. Fifth Army and General Oliver Lee's British Eighth Army were grinding up the peninsula. Rain, mud, and fierce German rearguard action slowed them to a crawl. By January 1944, the front froze along the Gustav line. And Cassino became the hinge, where everything stuck. Kesselring, Clark, Alexander, who wanted what? To understand why Monte Cassino became a 4-battle bloodbath, we have to look at the key players and their motivations. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the defender. Kesselring was no fanatical Nazi in the style of Himmler. He was a professional officer, a Luftwaffe field marshal turned theater commander. But he was fiercely loyal to his mission and a master of improvisation. His objectives were clear. Hold central Italy as long as possible. Tie down as many Allied divisions as he could. Avoid being pushed back too quickly to the Po Valley and the Alps. Prove to Hitler that Italy could be defended with fewer resources. Kesselring realized that he could not win Italy outright. But he could win time that Germany desperately needed while fighting in Russia and preparing for an inevitable Allied invasion in the West. Monte Cassino, with its commanding heights and narrow approaches, was the ideal place to bleed the Allies. General Harold Alexander, the strategic coordinator. Above the battlefield sat General Sir Harold Alexander, commander of Allied armies in Italy. His task: keep pressure on Germany and Italy without draining resources from the upcoming Normandy landings. He had to balance political expectations from Churchill, who cherished the Mediterranean strategy. Eisenhower's and the combined chiefs' demand to prioritize France. Italian terrain and miserable winter conditions. clashing personalities in his own command, American and British generals with different ideas. Alexander wanted a breakthrough to Rome to show that the Italian campaign was worthwhile. General Mark Clark, the American battlefield commander. Mark Clark, in command of U.S. Fifth Army, had his own ambitions. He wanted Rome. Not just for strategy, but for prestige. Becoming the man who took Rome had obvious post-war importance. But Clark faced stubborn German resistance, shortages of infantry replacements, difficult relations with British allies, pressure from above to produce victories without unacceptable casualties. Under him, American, British, French, Polish, Indian, New Zealand, and other units would be thrown into the Cassino fight. The political layer. Churchill saw Italy as the soft underbelly of Europe. He hoped that by pushing north, the Allies could knock Italy fully out of the Axis orbit, threaten Germany's southern flank, possibly reach Vienna or the Balkans before the Red Army. But as the campaign bogged down, the soft underbelly looked more like a tough old gut, as some soldiers bitterly joked. Into this mix, Kesselring injected one more factor: psychological warfare. He ordered Monte Cassino held at all costs, but avoided openly occupying the ancient Abbey itself at first, to reduce the risk of its destruction and to complicate Allied decisions. The stage was set for the first battle. The first battle, a fortress in all but name. By January 1944, the Allied command believed the Gustav line could be broken by a coordinated blow. An amphibious landing at Anzio behind German lines. A frontal offensive along the Rapido River and against Cassino. If both attacks succeeded, Kesselring's forces would be trapped between two Allied pincers. The key to this plan: speed. The U.S. II Corps, including the 36th Infantry Division, was ordered to attack across the flooded Rapido River, east of Cassino. The idea was to force a crossing, widen the bridgehead, and then turn toward Highway 6. But the Germans had prepared well. Minefields, barbed wire, well-sighted machine guns, and artillery covered the approaches. The Rapido was swollen, its banks turned into mud. The results were devastating. In 2 days of attacks, the 36th Division suffered heavy losses. One American officer later called it murder. Historians still debate whether the assault was a necessary risk or a poorly planned disaster. At Cassino town itself, the U.S. 34th Infantry Division struggled to advance up the steep slopes and ravines. German paratroopers, the elite Fallschirmjäger, held the high ground above the town. They were some of the toughest troops in the Wehrmacht, and Kesselring trusted them to hold. They turned ruins, caves, and terraces into strongpoints. The terrain magnified their strength. A few machine guns and mortars could dominate entire approaches. The First Battle of Cassino ended with limited gains, heavy casualties, and no breakthrough. The mountain still loomed above Highway 6. And then came the question that would haunt the next phase of the campaign. What about the Abbey? Decision point: the order to bomb Monte Cassino. By February 1944, Allied ground commanders were convinced that the Abbey itself was being used by German observers and possibly as a strongpoint. There is still debate about this. Many historians argue that the Germans had respected the Abbey's neutral status and did not occupy it before the bombing. According to some sources, Kesselring and the local German commanders ordered their troops to stay out of the monastery buildings, precisely to avoid giving the Allies a pretext. But from the valley floor, American soldiers saw suspicious signals, flashes, and perceived movement in the Abbey. To them, it looked like a fortress on a peak. U.S. commanders, including General Clark and his subordinates, pressed for the Abbey's destruction. They argued the Abbey provided perfect observation posts over the Liri Valley. Even if not heavily garrisoned, its very presence gave the Germans an advantage. Morale among the troops was suffering. They believed they were being watched from above. The decision went up the chain of command. Responsibility for the final order has been argued over ever since. One interpretation is General Alexander did not explicitly order the bombing, but did not forbid it. Clark and his Air Force counterparts requested it. Political concerns about destroying a cultural treasure were weighed, but military necessity won. On February 15, 1944, hundreds of Allied bombers appeared over Monte Cassino. In a few hours, they dropped tons of explosives and incendiaries on the Abbey. The ancient monastery, which had survived centuries of war, was reduced to rubble. The world watched in shock. But then something even stranger happened. The bombing did not solve the problem. It made it worse. The ruins were perfect defensive positions, thick stone walls shattered into irregular, hard-to-hit piles. Kesselring immediately ordered German paratroopers to occupy the rubble. Headquarters in Berlin praised him for holding the line. Some Allied officers, looking up at the shattered hill, privately wondered if they had just turned a difficult observation point into an almost impregnable fortress. The Second Battle of Cassino was about to begin. The second and third battles, courage, chaos, and stalemate. Following the bombing, Allied commanders believed the German defense had been shattered. They planned a quick assault to take advantage of the chaos. The New Zealand Corps, under General Bernard Freyberg, was given the lead in the second battle. It included New Zealand Infantry, Indian divisions, including the famed 4th Indian Division, heavy artillery and air support. The plan: drive through the shattered town of Cassino, seize the slopes, and then push onto the high ground leading to the Abbey. But the bombing had not neutralized the defenders. German paratroopers were still there, now better concealed than ever. The terrain had become a maze of rubble, craters, and broken buildings. Street by street, house by house, the attacking troops advanced into a world of dust and splinters. Assaults stalled on ruined streets swept by machine gun fire. Attempts to reach positions like the railway station and key strongpoints degenerated into bitter, close combat. The Indian divisions tried flanking moves up the steep ravines north of the Abbey, toward positions that became infamous. Hangman's Hill, the Snake's Head Ridge. These operations showed incredible personal bravery, but little strategic payoff. Men clung to exposed ledges for days, cut off, shelled from above. Despite limited gains, Cassino did not fall. The second battle ended in exhaustion. Freyberg and others questioned the entire concept. He argued that the Germans had turned the area into a death trap and that the attack lacked adequate preparation and coordination. Yet the pressure did not stop. The Anzio beachhead, launched to outflank Cassino, was itself under threat. Churchill famously called Anzio a beached whale. The more the Allies stalled at Cassino, the more troops Kesselring could spare to contain Anzio. So a third battle was ordered, again under Freyberg's New Zealand Corps, in March 1944. Once more, artillery barrages, infantry assaults, and localized advances bled both sides. Once more, the Germans held. By the end of the third battle, the Allies had achieved tactical penetrations. But the Gustav line, anchored on Cassino, still blocked the road to Rome. In Kesselring's headquarters, the mood was grim but determined. They were taking casualties they could ill afford. Yet they had achieved their aim, delayed the Allies, withstood multiple assaults, and kept Rome out of reach. The cost, on both sides, was piling up. The bloody ledger, 75,000 casualties for a road. From January to May 1944, the Cassino sector and its associated operations cost around 75,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, across both sides. Precise numbers vary by source, but historians generally estimate. Allied casualties in the Cassino battles and the associated assaults on the Gustav line in the tens of thousands. German casualties also significant, especially among elite paratrooper units and infantry battalions that were worn down and had to be replaced. The true cost of this decision was horrific. Entire battalions reduced to a handful of survivors. Multinational forces, Americans, British, Indians, New Zealanders, Poles, French colonial troops, fed into the same brutal terrain. Psychological trauma from fighting in ruins and on bare rock slopes under almost constant shellfire. At the political level, Cassino became a symbol. For Churchill, it was a deeply uncomfortable one. He had championed the Italian strategy, but now reporters asked, why push so hard up such terrible terrain? Was this truly the soft underbelly, or had the Allies walked into precisely the kind of attritional battle they wanted to avoid? For the U.S. leadership, including Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs, Cassino raised a different concern. Was the Mediterranean theater draining men and material that should be concentrated for Normandy? For Kesselring, the balance sheet was bittersweet. He had held Rome for months longer than many in Berlin expected. He had inflicted heavy casualties and pinned down Allied divisions. But he was burning through irreplaceable veteran units. Yet he judged that the trade-off was worth it. Every day he held Cassino bought time for Germany elsewhere. At the tactical level, some soldiers adopted a darker view. The mountain eats divisions. Headquarters never called it treason. But many veterans of Cassino, on both sides, later described decisions made far above them as careless with lives. And still, the battle was not over. The fourth battle and the alternatives that weren't taken. By May 1944, the Allies knew they needed a new approach. General Alexander reorganized his forces. The Polish II Corps under General Władysław Anders took a prominent role. French Expeditionary Corps units, including Moroccan Guerriers, mountain troops superbly suited to rough terrain, were assigned to attack the Urency Mountains to the south. This time, the plan was broader. Massive, coordinated artillery preparation. Multi-corps attacks along a wider front, not just a narrow thrust at Cassino town. A deliberate effort to break the Gustav line and force Kesselring to withdraw. The Poles would assault the heights around the Abbey directly, in what became one of the most bitterly fought episodes of the entire Italian campaign. They attacked in waves, up steep, exposed slopes, under fire from Germans who knew every fold of the ground. Polish losses were severe. But slowly, the German grip was pried loose. At the same time, French troops broke through in the mountains farther south, threatening to roll up the Gustav line from the flank. Faced with this wider crisis, Kesselring finally did what he had resisted for months. He ordered a withdrawal from Monte Cassino. On May 18, 1944, Polish troops reached the ruins of the Abbey and raised their flag. The monastery that had seen centuries of quiet contemplation now stood as a shattered symbol of modern industrial war. The road to Rome was, at last, open. But could the Allies have avoided this prolonged, four-battle struggle? Some proposed alternatives include a larger emphasis on flanking movements in the mountains rather than repeated frontal assaults, a different timing and use of the Anzio landing. If properly reinforced and aggressively used early, Anzio might have made Cassino strategically irrelevant. More focus on the Adriatic side, turning Kesselring out of his positions from the east. Historians disagree on how realistic these options were. One interpretation is the terrain and weather made large-scale maneuver operations extraordinarily difficult. Logistical constraints limited the Allies' ability to sustain multiple major offensives at once. Political pressure to capture Rome pushed commanders toward the most direct, visible route, Highway 6, through Cassino. From Kesselring's perspective, all these difficulties were advantages. Every Allied dilemma confirmed his belief that Cassino was the right place to stand and fight. Myths, memoirs, and the Cassino debate. Monte Cassino remains one of the most debated battles of World War II. Several major controversies continue to divide historians. 1. Did the Germans occupy the Abbey before the bombing? According to many sources, the Germans did not garrison the monastery itself before February 15, 1944, although they heavily fortified the slopes around it. The abbot and monks had repeatedly tried to protect the Abbey's neutral status. Allied soldiers on the ground, however, were convinced they were being observed from the Abbey. The truth may lie in the uncomfortable middle. Even if the Abbey was not full of troops, its position made it militarily significant. 2. Was the bombing militarily justified? Some argue the bombing was a tragic mistake that turned a neutral, unoccupied building into a perfect German strongpoint once it was rubble. The attack also damaged Allied moral standing and destroyed a cultural treasure unnecessarily. Others counter. Commanders had to act on the information they had at the time. With lives at stake, they prioritized tactical concerns over uncertain reports from the monastery's defenders. 3. Could Cassino have been bypassed? Another enduring myth is that Monte Cassino could simply have been bypassed. Critics say Allied planners fixated on Highway 6 and the most obvious route. A more imaginative use of the Anzio landing or harder pushes through the mountains might have made Cassino irrelevant. Defenders of the original strategy respond. The terrain made large-scale bypass operations extremely difficult. Supply lines would have been dangerously thin and exposed. Without breaking the Gustav line, any deep thrust risked encirclement. 4. Was Kesselring too stubborn or brilliantly calculated? Some German officers later criticized Kesselring's determination to hold every line as long as possible. They argued that more flexible withdrawals could have saved forces for the defense of northern Italy. Yet Kesselring's own view, reflected in his post-war memoirs, was that every extra week he held gained strategic time for Germany. Allied memoirs, too, reflect the Cassino scars. Polish veterans felt their sacrifices were underappreciated. Indian and New Zealand troops remembered Cassino as one of the worst battles they ever fought. The name Monte Cassino became shorthand for tactical bravery, strategic confusion, and the brutal reality of mountain warfare. Why Kesselring chose the mountain, and what it cost. Return to the original question. Why did Kesselring defend Cassino for 4 battles and 75,000 casualties? The answer has several layers. Strategically, Cassino anchored the Gustav line across Italy. Its height commanded the Liri Valley and Highway 6. As long as it held, Rome was shielded. Operationally, Kesselring understood that the Allies were constrained. They had limited resources for the Italian front. They were preparing for the decisive blow in France. They were under political pressure to take Rome. He exploited these constraints. By making Cassino a symbol as well as a strongpoint, he forced Allied leaders to keep attacking it. Each attack consumed troops, ammunition, and time. Politically, every month he held Rome was a propaganda victory for Germany. It showed that the Reich could still resist in the West. Finally, in Kesselring's calculus, Italy was not about winning, it was about delaying defeat. Cassino became the perfect place for that grim mission. For the Allies, Cassino was both a military obstacle and a psychological trap. They believed that once the Gustav line broke at this point, the campaign would accelerate. In some ways, they were right. After Cassino fell, Rome did indeed fall within weeks. But the price was staggering. The world remembers the ruins of Monte Cassino as a symbol of war's power to destroy history itself. Yet behind the stones were the men, paratroopers, infantrymen, mountain troops, engineers, who fought and died for a ridge line, a road, and a timetable. In the end, Kesselring's decision to defend Cassino did not save Italy for Germany. The Allies advanced, Rome fell, and the campaign moved north toward the Gothic line. But his stubborn stand achieved what he intended. He bought months of time, drained Allied strength, and turned central Italy into a battlefield that devoured divisions. And that is why one monastery on a mountain became the focus of 4 battles, 75,000 casualties, and an enduring question that historians still ask. Was Cassino a tragic necessity, or a terrible mistake repeated 3 times? The answer, like the ruins on the hill, is layered, fractured, and hard to see clearly even now.